Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar delivered by the ISM Trust. I am Helen Brunner, pioneer founder of London Suzuki Group, trustee of the British Suzuki Institute, and UK director for the European Suzuki Board. Before we begin, I've been asked to make a few points, a disclaimer. The content of this presentation is for information purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for other professional advice and should not be relied upon as such. You can contact us about your specific situation, and if you require legal advice, ISM members can contact the ISM legal team. You should be able to see me on your screen. You should also be able to hear me, but I can't hear you. If you experience any technical difficulties such as sound or quality issues, please let us know in the question box and we'll make attempts to resolve the issue. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM's website at ism.org/webinars. That said, my job now, in a few moments, is to investigate some of the Suzuki principles and see what is relevant today. I'm going to begin, in fact, with a short word of thanks to ISM. I've been a member for over 40 years, and ISM's helped me quite often in travel disputes, in working with parents, and looking after violin rentals, and so on. But ISM represents a kind of traditional attitude towards music, broad-minded maybe, but essentially Suzuki has been separated from that broadband, and I would like to see that change. Anyway, if it isn't changed this afternoon, I'd like it to change in my lifetime. So thank you to ISM for inviting me to have an opportunity to talk about what is, after all, my favorite subject. So I am a violin teacher, and I had myself a completely traditional violin background. I did my grade 8, and I went to the National Youth Orchestra, and then went to Royal College of Music, and I got my diploma, etc., and then I left to live in America for a few years, and that's where I came across Suzuki Method. It was actually my children that introduced me to Suzuki Method, not any other musician. I had not really heard of it. I'm talking about a long time ago. This was in the 60s. I'm nearly 80 now. And my 4 children learned in their first year. They were aged something like 3, 4, and 6, I think. They all learned with these teeny tiny little violins, something called Suzuki Method. And I was immensely impressed how the individual lessons and how the group lessons were put together by this Japanese teacher. She'd come over, she'd learned English, and she was directly from Matsumoto, Japan, where her teacher, Suzuki, was still alive and well. Anyway, in 1969, I came back, looked everywhere for a Suzuki teacher. So my little children, by then 4 of them, could learn to play the violin, cello, piano, whatever. But there wasn't anybody. There was nothing in England. So I was a pioneer. I was a reluctant pioneer, actually. I wanted to have my own career, but wasn't able to because I knew I had a mission. I had to find something for my children. And by then I gathered a few neighbors around, and so we were quite a little bundle of about 30 people. So it all began in Kensington in my kitchen table. And then we managed to get some funding, and we had John Kendall came over and William Starr came over, and with the courtesy of Hertfordshire Music Services, very important part of the Suzuki history, I might say, we were able to start some basic training. And in 1972, we actually founded a proper London Suzuki Group. By then we had violin, cello, and piano. In 1978, then the British Suzuki Institute was founded by Felicity Littman, and that was for the teacher training by Suzuki himself, by visiting teachers, and Suzuki training in Great Britain. So that was a very important watershed. And most people have absolutely no idea about the Suzuki training. Why? Because it's very long, it's very complicated, and it's a bit sort of chicken and egg. What comes first? Do you decide you will become a Suzuki teacher and then go for training? Or do you say to yourself, well, there may be something in it. Why don't I give it a whirl? Meanwhile, there's a book, very important book. It's called Nurtured by Love. Suzuki wrote the book. It's a very slender volume, and it's very significant for us. I was one of the luckiest people in the whole world because I actually was able to go to Japan and study with Suzuki myself personally, as he was my violin teacher. And I was graduated in Matsumoto in 1983. So I was able to come back and do some work here and in Europe and in the USA. And interestingly enough, I was so enthusiastic, but I couldn't seem to get other people to be enthusiastic. What is Suzuki method? Well, you have to start young. That's one of his concepts. You have to listen first before you play. That's one of his concepts. Very important. Parents are involved. That's a really new idea. It was in those days. The fact that the parents actually even sometimes learned along with their children. That you had individual lessons and group lessons every week. Sometimes it's not every week, every other week we have group lessons, sometimes once a month. But the principle is there, that you have individual teaching on your instrument, and then you have group lessons, because you want to appeal to the child's sense of peer obligation, if you like. And a common repertoire. That's really important and very underrated. Common repertoire, Suzuki spent a lifetime getting together. I can speak about the violin one for sure. There are 8 volumes, and it takes you from Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And volume 9, which is a standalone volume, is Mozart Violin Concerto. There's one in A and there's one in D, the 2 big violin concertos. So it kind of, in Suzuki repertoire, it's like a graduated ladder. I mean, it's a scale. It takes you right up through the whole basic repertoire via dances, songs, arias, Vivaldi concertos, via the Bach double, more Vivaldi concertos, all the Handel sonatas, lots of little pieces as well. Then the Bach A minor, that's a very big one. And then huge things like La Foglia, all of these very much at the core of most traditional violin teaching. It's sort of straight pedagogy. We use the pedagogy very seriously. We're taught exactly how to teach every piece, and we have our own ideas on them, but we are given the framework of how to work on every piece. And I mean every note of every single piece. So by the time you finally graduate as a teacher, my goodness, you have hours and hours of music already memorized, and you know not only how to play every piece, but how to teach every piece. With the repertoire goes recordings. Suzuki was very clear about this. He said you should listen 1 year ahead, 1 book ahead. The idea behind it is, which is very significant, is that this is the mother tongue method. Suzuki himself actually never used the word Suzuki method. Sometimes he even laughed about it. He said, what is this Suzuki method? It's actually the mother tongue method. And people still talk about the Suzuki method as if it was some kind of new idea. And he would say, no, 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 this is a very old idea. This has been going around since man first walked on this earth. This is called the mother tongue method. And in the mother tongue method, as you know, you do not start to talk until you've done an incredible amount of listening. It's actually extraordinary, isn't it? You listen for, 4 months while you're in your mother's stomach. And then after that, there's another 5-6 months before you actually talk. You might make some sounds, but it's a clear year before you actually talk. So Suzuki was very involved in this, very drawn to this. He was way above his time. We used to say, he was a generation before his time, but you know what? He was 2-3 generations before his time, because he was motivated by Japan after the war. He was a professional violinist, and he felt strongly that Japan had just got to rethink their life. And what he wanted to do was to change the whole form of education so that music was a critical part of that education, because he said, for the noble human being. So his concept is always character first and then the music. So the child comes before the violin, the child comes before the piano, whatever. And that has really important implications, because if the child comes first, then how do you cope with the fact that you might find difficulty in teaching that child? That child might be what you might call unmusical. And he said, well, think of a newborn baby. Parents don't look in the cot and say, no, I wonder whether little Jimmy will ever speak. Parents have this sublime, high expectation that all their children, unless they are handicapped, will speak. And that high expectation is met. It's met everywhere in the world. And we take it for granted. And he said, you shouldn't take it for granted. You should actually look and see what it means to have a child speaking his own language. The repertoire, as we know it, is for every child. And the repertoire, as we know, is all over the world. I mean, Suzuki method is now vastly spreading throughout China, throughout the Philippines, throughout America, of course, was one of the first, but all through South America, Canada, all through Europe. New countries, we call them, new countries like Lithuania and Latvia and Croatia, and they're coming thick and fast. So the numbers of Suzuki children are going up and up and up into their millions, and they all have the same common repertoire. And I would like to demonstrate the significance of having a common repertoire, because if everybody knows the same piece, there is a kind of sonic resonance. There's a global resonance. Every child in Melbourne, in Toronto, in Paris, in Rome, in London is playing the same piece. And they all learn the same piece, and then they can come together. And when they come together, it makes the most amazing sound. The next clip is only 23 seconds, and it's not terribly good quality, but it will be better if you see it on the recording after this live seminar. It's 23 seconds of Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, third movement, and this is 134 children who came together for a big concert at the Albert Hall, and this was our first rehearsal. The concert at the Albert Hall was on Sunday, which is 27th of March 2016, and this is the day before. This is the first time these children had ever got together under the direction of Koen Rens. And you can see him, I think, in the corner over there. This is the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, Suzuki style. So it got better. And I'm sure it's on YouTube now. And if you can find it, there are CDs around. And we're having another concert, quick plug for the Royal Albert Hall 2020. We're taking over the Albert Hall again. That's another whole saga of how the Albert Hall turned us down again and again for this. And we had to really push our way through. But Suzuki's being ahead of his time is one thing, but what is interesting to me is that actually the world has caught up with him so often. And I'll give you another indication of that. About 25 years ago, the ABRSM, a very distinguished organization, which you know very well, asked a group of us from ESTA, ESTA is the European String Teachers Association, to come for a meeting. And they wanted to ask us to give advice to see if they could move forward, if you like, and any ideas we had. And Nanny Jameson was there for viola, I was there for violin, Rodney Slapford was there for double bass, and Joan Dixon was there for the cello. This was the string section. And I was absolutely full of Suzuki ideas. And so the first thing I said was, it would be wonderful if we could have recordings. Okay, so I get the letter back, clearly out of the question. If we had recordings, then all the children would play like robots. That was their word. They would play like robots. Now all the ABRSM children play. They have recordings left, right, and center. And as you know, they're actually now sold inside the book. Another of my suggestions, Suzuki, another of my suggestions was that the outside cover should be very bright. It used to be white inside the piano copy. I said, it's the wrong way around. We should put the child first. So they said, no, that won't work for publishing reasons. I'm sorry, it's not possible. Another suggestion I had was that we should have a separate scale book. There was no separate scale book, just tiny little lists saying which scales you had to play. And now that's another thing. Turned me down, said, no, we don't want a separate scale book with large print. It's not economical. And fourth thing, my fourth suggestion, it wasn't a very good meeting for me, I can tell you, was that the syllabus was longer, kept viable longer. In those days, it was 2 years max, that was it. Now, then it changed to 3 years max. Their letter to me said, by the way, clearly, oh, we could never do that because it means the teachers would get too bored doing the same thing. Well, actually, funnily enough, the teachers weren't too bored. And as you may know, they've now changed it again, and now it's 4 years. So, you know, the ABRSM has just gradually become more Suzuki-fied without them, of course, recognizing it as such. But I think the reason why it takes so long is that Suzuki's idea, which is so obvious to me, I cannot think why it isn't prevalent from one end of this country to the other, is that every child can do it. I mean, his whole ethos is every child can. And I looked in the ISM all about the music manifesto, you know, which has been much talked about in this last year, 2018 and 2019. And they have things, I'll just read one sentence that just sprang out to me. You see, as a Suzuki teacher, I would find this a very, very unusual, if not even unacceptable. It says, we should identify and nurture the most talented young musicians. It all sounds very reasonable, but from our point of view, it's not reasonable because our point of view is every single child is born with an enormous talent to be extremely proficient musician if they so choose. We all know there's going to be some children who are going to be absolutely extraordinary, exceptional violinists or pianists or whatever, and we have got a load of them come through Suzuki and are now on the boards and making their CDs and playing all their concertos. I mean, loads. But his point is that everybody could be a very fine musician. So we would never have this judgment. And this is at the bottom of everything, that this idea of selection and who is better at music than others. They say that the difference between a traditional teacher and a Suzuki teacher is that a traditional teacher might well believe that every child can be educated, but a Suzuki teacher knows that every child can be educated. So just think about that for a moment. It sounds nearly the same, but not quite. Because if you think, oh, I really believe every child can, so you teach successfully, everything goes well until maybe 1 in 20, maybe 1 in 10, if you're less lucky, comes to you and can't sing, can't clap, actually has trouble maybe walking in a straight line, has trouble crossing over, maybe dyslexic, maybe autistic, but maybe none of those, maybe just an ordinary kid who's never had any kind of music. And then you treat them like you treat other children, maybe with a little bit more care, maybe with a little bit more time, but you say to yourself, oh my goodness, this child is unmusical. I mean, I played an A on the piano, they groan, they can't clap in time. And then you think, all right, this one is not musical. So we'll let him off the choir or take him out of instrumental lessons. I mean, he's proved, this is the traditional point of view, he's demonstrated lack of musicality. Well, a Suzuki teacher has the same situation, and he or she will look at the child and go, right, pull up my sleeves, we'll try one more thing, and we'll find where that child is. And like it or not, and some of us deeply sigh because it's going to take us so long, but we know that the child is musical. The child may not appear musical and maybe demonstrate unmusicality, but we know that every child is musical, just as we know that every child is going to speak. Unless they're really, really severely damaged, all the babies that are going to be born are all going to be speaking their mother tongue. And not just mother tongue. If their first language is not English, then they're going to learn a mother tongue, and then they're going to learn English before you can say Jack Robinson. They will be 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds chatting in 2 languages, or if they come from India, they have 3 languages or 4 languages. I was once in Delhi giving a talk to parents and said, oh, you parents, you really must understand this well, because you all know about the mother tongue, because you have so many languages here. Why don't you put up your hand if you have children who are bilingual, right? Big mistake. Very few hands went up. And I turned to my colleague, Rama, what's happened? She said, oh, Helen, no, in India, they are trilingual or quadrilingual. Very few are only bilingual. So that was my learning curve. So children learn any number of languages just so easily. And they learn, once they know what the repertoire is, where they're going, then the parents can come in and see where they're going. You know, it's wonderfully comforting when you're 7 or 9 or 11 to see that you've already done 2 books and you've got 4 or 5 books to go. You could say the same for the ABRSM. You've got in grade 2 and you know you're going to do grade 3, grade 4, but we know all the music ahead of time. And the students know that there's the Vivaldi A minor up there, or there's the Bach double. One day will I ever play Bach double, or the Bach A minor, or the Mozart. I'm longing to be able to play that. And it is a built-in kind of motivation. Not kind of, it is a built-in motivation for the children to see where they're going for. So those are the high flyers that come our way, and once you know how to teach them, and once you split everything down into the tiniest components, all of which we study greatly in our teacher training. So in this country, we have an excellent teacher training. It's in different parts of the country. Suzuki tends to be London-centric, and I'm very aware of that, and I'm embarrassed about it sometimes, and I try everything I possibly can to make it not happen and not appear that way. We have teacher training in Birmingham, we have teacher training in Cardiff, we have teacher training in Belfast, we have teacher training in Edinburgh, and of course London, and London is the biggest one. And our national course is in London. We also have graduation, Suzuki style graduation, book 1, book 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 8 for the different instruments. Flute has not as many as cello, and viola has the same as violin, I think. But very, very, very important is our graduation system. And we started off, all the graduation concerts were in London, of course, but now graduation concerts have been in Edinburgh, in Glasgow, in Manchester this year, I think. We did one in Bristol and so on. We try and, Exeter, we try and spread it around so that it isn't just London. And spreading it around means it isn't just private education either. This is where the parents come in, mostly is in the private sector, because of course we want our parents there to create the perfect environment for the mother tongue. And I think in the early days, I'm talking about in the sort of 60s or 70s, Suzuki actually had the teachers teach the parents how to play the violin. Then that became less effective and it got dropped. So now we teach the parents how to hold the violin, how to sit at the piano, how to hold the cello bow, how to blow on the flute. We teach them just the basic elements of the very, very early steps so that they can participate. Then comes schooling. And Suzuki method, once you've got your music services on board, and we can say there's a great success going on all around the Birmingham area and many others too. Hugely successful, people from the services taking Suzuki aboard and allowing parents in. It is problematic, I do see, because more and more teachers are feeling, well, school teachers, I'm talking about directors, are feeling nervous about health and safety, and they are feeling slightly handicapped, if they like, because they feel they want to have the parents in to watch the lessons, but they feel it might be a hazard or a problem. And so more and more schools are finding it difficult. But, you know, there's always hope. I've just been to Sweden and heard about a school in Sweden, and the guy who runs it, he's the director, it's the other side of Uppsala, and he loves Suzuki so much. He's got 5 Suzuki teachers in the school, and he wants to rename his school, elementary school, Suzuki School. And I just thought that was lovely, because that would be, well, my idea of Suzuki heaven, is that we actually get the Suzuki method to be understood by the schools, and the parents go in at the beginning, maybe not secondary school, because you wouldn't probably have parents in the lesson anyway at that time, but to allow the parents in the beginning. Another aspect of the parents would be what we call SECE, which is Suzuki Early Childhood Education, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I originally thought it was a bit like all the other, you know, the monkey musics and the colored strings and just loads and loads of kinds of early education out there. But the Suzuki early education is all built around the parents. It's really parent education, and they go from beginning, from birth. That is what Suzuki always wanted us to do, is to teach from birth onwards. And I have a lovely example of that, and I'm going to play a little clip now of Pearl. Pearl was 19 when we took this, made this video. She's now 20, and she's now in a home. She's highly, highly handicapped. Her big brother, Oscar, was my pupil. Brilliant little violinist. Oh my goodness, he used to play Vivaldi, the 4th movement, the 4th one, you know, the Presto. He absolutely loved it, and he was a great, gorgeous musician, and he had a sister, and she was born without eyes. And on the day she was born, she was whisked off to Moorfields, and they told her there are no eyes there, and we don't know what else is wrong. And they took a taxi from Moorfields to my house, and they ran upstairs, interrupted my teaching, and the mother came to me and she said, Pearl's born, just the day she was born, the day. Will you take her? I said, of course I'll take her. She's got no eyes. Oh, of course I'll take her. Anyway, Pearl is highly handicapped, and she's now in a 24/7 home because the law says she has to be looked after all the time. She can't walk alone. She can't feed herself. She's completely mute, and she can't see anything, but she can hear. And she has had, I would say, hundreds of lessons, violin lessons, if you can call them violin lessons. They're violin sessions, should we say, happy sessions with me singing away and Pearl sort of kind of vaguely joining in. Anyway, Pearl's one of, I think, success stories of Suzuki method. She's going to play a little tiny weeny bit of Twinkle. And as her mother said very sweetly not long ago, do you know, playing the violin's the only thing that Pearl does, the only thing that Pearl does. That's her dad in the mirror. So she was 19. Okay. Pearl, my lovely one, you're on the ISM webinar. It's always very touching for me to see, because, you know, if you've watched her grow up and you've seen how her mother has to look after her, you know, 24/7, morning, noon, night, day, and you just see what that does to a family and how they've been changed by it, and how somehow they can actually say Suzuki changed our life. You know, Pearl changed their life, but Suzuki changed our life. And I've got another little photograph here I just wanted to show you about changing life. So there's a little snip there of Suzuki teaching some of my students in 1980, I think, when he came over, 1982 perhaps. And this is taken from an article in The Spectator. And here's the title. It says, "The Suzuki method didn't make me a great violinist, but it did change my life. Mary Wakefield." It's, you know, I love titles. You don't really need to read the article at all because it's all there. It didn't make her a great violinist. She's actually a journalist, but it did change her life. So how come it changed her life? What does that mean? Well, to be a Suzuki child, it's like learning a language, and you've learned violin as a language, and that violin remains with you all your life, and she still plays it from time to time, even as a 45-year-old woman. And in that clip that I showed you here, this one, there is a Suzuki violin teacher right here. There's a Suzuki mother teacher right here, and there's another Suzuki violin teacher right here. So out of those 5 children, I don't know the other 2, I don't know what's happened to them. Out of those 5 children, 3 of them are life changers, and they've gone on to become Suzuki parents. And that is this very interesting statistic to me. Like, I'm only teaching now either my grandchildren or godchildren or children of my Suzuki students. That's what my studio is full of, because Suzuki people feel something, and they feel something with such an intensity. They feel the music is like they've accessed this amazing drug. It's like an addiction. It's called music. And it changes your life if you've really got it. If you're sitting in front of music score and struggling, and you're practicing for day after day until finally you do an examination, and then you get the next piece of music and you struggle, that's not going to become an addiction. That's something terminal, and people drop out. And Suzuki was very strict about that. I can remember he went like this and said, there's a triangle. This is bad education. He said, this is like book 1, book 2, right up to book 8. And what about all these children that have dropped out? He said, and he said it personally to me, you must do tower education. If you have 10 at book 1, 10 at book 2, 10 at book 3, 10 at book 4, why would they drop out? You don't drop out of English. You don't suddenly say, you know, when you're 9 or 10, I don't think I'm going to speak anymore. I mean, we have such high expectations of how you're going to use the language. We would just never dream of talking like that. But this Suzuki has such implications for handicapped children that we do actually have a lot, I mean, far more than our fair share of children who are dyslexic, dyspraxic, autistic, all on the spectrum, Asperger's and so on. I mean, every teacher I know has got 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, really a lot. And I went the other day to a conference in a big hotel, and there were 1,000 people, 1,000 teachers there. And one of the sessions was an hour-and-a-half session, and it was all about these handicapped children, if you like. I don't know what the word is, but basically children that have special needs of some kind. And 3 people spoke, 3 different experts all spoke. And their point of view, which was very laudable, was let's, you know, make the best of a bad thing. But their point of view universally was, how on earth do we get the music into those children? Let's turn the music blue. Let's put plastic on it. Let's make the notes have sandpaper on. Let's have the notes blown up. Let's have the note. And I'm looking and I'm thinking for an hour and a half, oh my God, am I the only person in the room that thinks, what on earth? Are you wasting your time or what? If you want children to play, then you just play for them and they will copy you if they have the capacity to have a teacher who will show them how to do it. That's all that children need, is just to be shown how to do it. And if they're given very small instruments, which are their pint-sized instruments, and they're given things in tiny, tiny little bits, the jigsaw pieces of Suzuki teaching are infinitesimally small. So it's I can do every step. Not like when I was at Royal College of Music, and after a whole term, I said, what shall I do for my Christmas holidays? And I remember the teacher picked up my music. It was Brahms' Violin Concerto, by the way, and he waved it at me and said, why don't you have a look at the second movement? Anybody who knows the second movement of the Brahms Violin Concerto, you know, we never talk like that. We prepare everybody way in advance. If you want to do the Mendelssohn, you've got to listen to it, listen to it, listen to it. You've got to have the music blown up. You've got to see exactly what are the difficulties, what are the runs, what key are you in, what are the fingerings, what are the bowings. And in that clip you saw of the Mendelssohn, most of the children didn't speak English. Well, I mean, we had 22 different languages. So maybe it's not true to say most, but a large proportion of those children did not speak English at all. So and we didn't even mention the fact that they weren't going to read, that don't bring your music. We didn't even say that on the registration. It doesn't say anywhere. And that's, of course, what poor old Albert Hall felt so bad about when we first went. They said, oh no, it would never fit our aesthetic. All those children running around, I said 1,000, it was in the end 1,300. All those children running around, and you know, what? They're not going to have any music, no music stands, no chairs, you know, like, oh my goodness. And no rehearsals. This is just like a recipe for disaster. So I was turned down very strongly, you know, this is not the right aesthetic for the Royal Albert Hall, I'm afraid. And when we went recently to ask to have a repeat concert, all over us. Oh, my dear, when would you like to come? It's all open. The diary is free for you. It was the best children's concert, said the education officer, they'd had since 1862, since time started. So, you know, people don't actually know how well the Suzuki children play. If you just get over this awful reading hang-up. Children in the Suzuki method, I promise you, do learn to read, but it is delayed reading. That is to say, we learn through the ear first. Once you've learnt what you're going to play and you've got it in your ear and your brain, then you match that by being given the music, the notes, because of course you're going to have to find out up bows and down bows and which position you're going to be in. So you match your inner ear with what your eye tells you. You do not learn the music through your eyes, you learn it through your ears. And this just seems to be a kind of bullock for British teachers. I don't know what it is, why we are so sort of glued to the music. Because if you look at the whole globe, people aren't glued to the music in Chile. I've been there. Or in Peru, I've been there. Or in Hong Kong or Japan, I've been there. And lots of places I haven't been. Fiji, I have been. They aren't glued to the music there. There's loads of places. India, they're not glued to the music. India, it's huge, thousands, millions and millions of people. They're not glued to the music. All traditional music is oral. And, you know, like Finland, Sweden, oral. Go to the north of Scotland, oral, everything. Oral tradition, fiddlers. They don't learn through the music. The music is a latter day, it's perhaps 150 years old, I'm just guessing now, and it's Western European idea that we've got to learn music that way. And Suzuki said, no, I don't see it. I don't see why we should do that. And some of the teacher trainees we get who've been brought up traditionally, they kind of think to themselves, number one, they think they won't be able to memorize. Memory is a vastly underrated subject. Everybody has a brilliant memory. If they can speak their own language, they've already learned thousands and thousands of words. And they learned it naturally and simply. And anybody who can drive a car, brilliant memory. You've got brilliant focus memory, you've got a brilliant memory up here, you've got brilliant visual memory, you've got brilliant hand, left hand, feet, right hand, coordinating memory. Otherwise you'd be a danger and you'd be off the roads. Anybody who can swim has got a good memory, anybody who could ride a bicycle has got a good memory. So we still go around saying, oh, I don't have a very good memory, or her memory is quite good, his is not so good. It's nonsense. We can all develop brilliant memory. And Suzuki knew that. I don't know how he knew it, but he did. He absolutely knew that that is what our human potential is valued at. And knowing that, he had absolutely no trouble in saying the children will all memorize everything. So they learn book one and they don't forget it because they've learned it from memory first. And then when they do book two, they do book one again. And then they do book two, book three, book four, book five. So my students who are now, let's say, out of university, maybe they studied geography or maybe they studied banking, I don't know. And they're 25, 26, 27, and you give them a violin and say, play Bach double, oh, no problem. Vivaldi A minor, no problem, absolutely. Monticello's, go for it, play, no problem. And I mean no problem, they just remember it because they've remembered everything and they've developed their musical memory. And our teacher trainees all develop beautiful and very efficient musical memories. And that, of course, has a incredible spin-off on their life. Talk about Suzuki being life-changing, because then they memorize telephone numbers too, and they memorize the passport numbers and their Visa card numbers. And, you know, they have sharper memories. They're more awake, if you like, in this area. And developing memory is one of the things that they think, the teacher trainees think is going to be a problem, and somehow it isn't. Then the other thing they think is going to be a problem, sometimes it is, is the parents. How somebody thinking to themselves, I'm just out of college, you know, how am I going to cope with parents? And we do give them a lot of parent training. I mean, we help as much as we possibly can with parent training. It's not going to be completely easy. They need all the help they can get, but they've got the training, and it does take 5 years. British Suzuki Institute is where to go for the training. And in my life, I have met countless, I would say hundreds of traditional teachers who've trained to become Suzuki teachers. What I have never met yet is a Suzuki teacher who's trained to be a Suzuki teacher, who then comes to me and says, you know what, I gave it a try, I've decided to go back to the old way. The old way means no parents, no group lesson, no fixed repertoire, and no listening. It's unthinkable. It's completely unthinkable. So we've got a question. Where are the books available? Oh my goodness, British Suzuki Institute. Also between you and me, Amazon, but don't tell Minette Joyce. If you go to British Suzuki Institute, they're available all instruments: violin, viola, cello, double bass, piano, recorder, flute, mandolin, organ, guitar, harp, piano, did I say? I hope I've got them all. Anyway, all those instruments. So you can get all of the instruments. We have got thousands of children in Great Britain now learning violin, cello, piano, thousands. Difficult for me to be accurate in giving you the stats, because what about the Suzuki teacher who hasn't paid his or her membership? It's a membership organization. It's not done by law. Suzuki didn't want it done by law. That means to say you're going to find in Great Britain loads, and I mean loads, of teachers who are not actually Suzuki trained, but like using the music and call themselves sort of Suzuki teachers. And he was told in no sharp terms by his publisher in the US that he's got to put a stop to that. They wanted to protect the name Suzuki. And he, in no uncertain terms, said, I'm sorry, I just want everybody in the world. Because, and then I remember him saying, maybe if they use the books, maybe it makes them a little bit better teacher. So all I can say is it's thousands in Great Britain and it's millions in the world, people learning, children learning. So teacher training is the huge difference, because we look at the other kind of teacher training available, and I hope I'm all right in saying, but ABRSM is one of them, Trinity is one of them, you know, Color Strains is one of them, and they don't have any kind of audition. I mean, we have to audition. You have to be quite a good violinist before you even think of auditioning to become a teacher, because we want good musicians there at the bottom line. And we see that you can go on a course for 2 weeks or something in a lovely part of Great Britain, and it's going to cost, you know, like £500 or something. We think, oh my God, you're so lucky. We go to wherever we have to go. We don't have much choice, and it's going to cost masses of money and masses of time. But the more we can involve the music services, the more we can help each other. We run everything we can to give you bursaries. I mean, we bend over backwards. There are silent auctions. There are Friends of Suzuki. There are concerts. We have big concerts, and when we have like Albert Hall, you know, we immediately siphon off for the bursary fund. Teachers' bursaries are absolutely at the heart. Teachers' training and the bursaries for such are at the heart of our training. Absolutely, that's what the whole British Suzuki Institute is about. So we don't want anybody ever to say, well, you know, it would have been lovely. I'd love to have been a Suzuki teacher, but you know what? I couldn't afford it. Please don't let that be you. Please let us try and help you, because you know what? Your life will change for the better, and it will never, ever be the same. I mean, it's got a risk because you've got to be prepared for change. I always made a little joke that beside my front door, I used to say, press this bell with caution because your life might change. It was a joke, but you know, at some level it's not a joke too, because once the parents, you know, really take this on, it changes everything in their life. I mean, it changes how they speak to their children, changes how the children speak to them, changes how she speaks to her husband and how her husband speaks to her. It changes how they affect their whole life. They don't cram it so full with other things. It certainly changes their schooling. Suzuki was very, very strict about that. All my students have to have A grades in everything they do, because otherwise they're not Suzuki students. Otherwise they haven't learned how to learn. Because we show our children, when they're 3, when they're 4, when they're 5, we show them how to learn with love, nurtured by love. We show them how to do it. And then they can do that in their history lesson. We learn respect for each other. We start the lesson with a bow. It's very significant. It's just a tiny moment, but it's a way of saying, I respect the teacher. But it's much more important too. Teacher says, I respect you. And then when you go to school, when you're in kindergarten, you can learn to respect the teacher. Even if the teacher's not very good, we all deserve full respect. And Suzuki teachers vary like any other teachers in the world, but we all need all the respect that we can give. And children learn that respect and learn how to work with that teacher, how to get absolutely the best out of that teacher. So I'm just going to round up. Suzuki's principles are listening, repetition, standard repertoire, one repertoire, parental involvement, and generally learning with love. And you'll never be the same again. Thank you for letting me have this time for ISM. Thank you. Goodbye.